Hi, everybody. We are focusing on the urinary system today. We are going to go ahead and start with looking at some of the main functions of the urinary system. So urinary system is important in terms of balancing your water and salt. So when we're talking about salt, we're focusing on things like iron, sodium, potassium, calcium, chloride, etc., which are basically essential in terms of the functionality of the nervous system, cardiovascular system, your muscular system, etc. You also, using your kidney, you can help balance your pH. Just a reminder, we discussed this earlier in the semester, that your blood pH is maintained under homeostasis between the range of 7.35 to 7.45, which your urinary system is contributing significantly to helping your blood maintain this magic number. You also have the ability to filter blood. So if you do have toxins or metabolic waste like urea and uric acid, you do remove these from the body using your kidneys. And lastly, you also have the ability to remove any excess water from your system. Or you can, in another sense, again, balance your water. If you drink a lot of water, you typically have urinate extra water out of your system, and if you are dehydrated, your urine volume decreases significantly. A quick note I mentioned earlier, we discussed or mentioned metabolic waste. The two main metabolic wastes we have in urine is associated with proteins and nucleic acid. The protein metabolic byproducts are urea and creatinine, and the main metabolic waste of nucleic acid or DNA or RNA is uric acid, which is kind of easy to remember, acid with acid. Now, urinary system in terms of organs are pretty simple. You have two kidneys that are located within the abdominal pelvic cavity, partially protected by your rib cage, as we'll take a look later. You have two tubes that are extending from the kidneys collecting the urine. These tubes are called the ureters. Ureters end in the muscular tube that you have right here, called the urinary bladder. And eventually, urinary bladder allows the urine to be excreted out of the body through a tube called the urethra. We'll talk about each of these in terms of anatomy, mostly gross anatomy, and we go into a lot more detail about microscopic anatomy of the kidney. So let's go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, kidneys, they are paired, they are bean-shaped organs, partially protected by your rib cage. Location-wise, they are within the T12 to L3 vertebra. If you guys don't remember, T stands for the thoracic vertebra, and L stands for the lumbar region. Where you have the ureter coming out of your kidney, or where your blood vessels are getting into the kidney. This basically indentations you see right here. This is referred to as the hilus. And again, it's the point of entry for nerves, ureter, and blood vessels. Now, surrounding your kidney, you do have a thick fibrous capsule, which is also referred to as the renal capsule, which partially protects your kidneys from trauma. Now, we're going to start by looking at the gross anatomy of the kidneys. If you look at the kidney, again, the outermost layer, which is the protective layer you see in the dark brown color, is referred to as your fibrous capsule. And going deeper into your kidney, you notice that you have a light pink edge in your kidney, and this is referred to as the renal cortex. And then within your renal cortex, you have the darker region, which as a whole, so see where I'm pointing to on my arrows, this whole structure as a whole is referred to as the renal medulla. However, each of the renal medullas, their whole renal medulla is made up of these inverted triangles, which are referred to as the renal pyramids. So if I'm asking you what are the individual structures on their own called, they're called renal pyramids. However, if I put all of the renal pyramids together, what do I get? I get my structure called renal medulla. Now notice that your renal cortex, which were the edges, actually dip down between the pyramids. So these extensions right here, these are referred to as the renal columns. So these extensions are renal columns. Now again, the main job of your kidney will be to produce urine. So when the urine is produced, it gets picked up by a network of tubes starting at the end of each of the renal pyramids. So these structures, and I'm gonna surround them, these beginning parts right here, these are called minor calyx. Minor calyx. If we talk on multiple, they call minor calyces with C-E-S instead of an X. Now, when the minor calyx collect the urine, they merge together and form a larger structure. So imagine these three come together. They form this larger structure called the major calyx. So here is a major calyx. Here's another major calyx. Here is another major calyx right here, which is merging of these two. Now, when the major calyces, I apologize, major calyces join each other, then you form the next structure, which is this funnel ending to this structure right here. That is referred to as the renal pelvis. So collection of urine starts with, in the macroscopic level, it starts with minor calyx, which joins together to form major calyx, and major calyx join together to form renal pelvis. And renal pelvis empties into the tube that exits the kidney called the ureter. Now, when we look at the positioning of the kidneys, and we can go back to the earlier picture, again, this is the posterior aspect. So this is the right-hand side, this is the left-hand side. The right kidney is sitting slightly below the left kidney. And the main reason for that is the positioning of the liver. If you recall from the digestive system, the right lobe of the liver is larger, which pushes the right kidney slightly below your left kidney. Now, we talked about all of these structures: cortex, medulla, pyramids, column, major and minor calyx, renal pelvis, and hilum. But the one that I didn't mention before is the word nephron. So what is a nephron? Nephron is a microscopic unit of a kidney. And when we talk about kidney, we said the job of your kidney is to produce urine. At the microscopic level, the component that actually makes the urine is your nephrons. So your nephrons, again, are identified as the functional unit of the kidney because there are the structures that are responsible for production of urine and balancing your water, balancing your ions and salt, balancing your pH, getting rid of your waste products. All of these are done by your nephrons. Now, for us to be able to, again, balance the water and the ions and get rid of the waste product, etc., you need to first bring blood into your kidney, allow the kidney to do what it needs to do, and then take the filtered, clean blood away from your kidney. So what are the branching of the blood vessel, starting with the artery that enters the kidney all the way to the vein that leaves your kidney? So we're gonna track this using our picture first, and then I'll show you a flow chart that demonstrates the same concept. So the main blood vessel that is coming into your kidney is renal artery. Renal artery branches, which you can see one here, one right here, called segmental arteries. segmental arteries. Segmental arteries goes between the pyramids, the renal pyramids, and this is called interlobar artery. Interlobar artery, as an in-between lobes. Interlobar arteries continues to these branches that are literally running right between the border of the cortex and the medulla, and these are called the arcuate artery. Arcuate artery branches to these branches you see right here. These are referred to as the cortical radiate artery. Cortical radiate artery. Some people refer to them as interlobular arteries, not interlobar, but interlobular, as in between little tiny lobes. And the cortical radiate artery branches to these really tiny branches you see on the sides. These ones that are coming off, they're like little branches of the tree. And these are identified as afferent arteriole. Afferent arteriole. So again, kind of looking at the branching, renal artery to segmental artery to interlobar artery, arcuate artery, cortical radiate artery, and afferent arteriole, which are again depicted as these little tiny branching or that comes off of your cortical radiate. Now, afferent arteriole forms what we identified as glomerulus. Glomerulus is a bundle of capillaries, and I'll show you in the picture in just a second where these are. And it comes off, glomerulus, that comes off as efferent arteriole. So afferent goes into the glomerulus, efferent comes out of the glomerulus. Now, efferent arteriole branches to the peritubular capillaries, or something known as vasa recta. Yes, I know the words are unfamiliar to you, but we are going to understand them as we go through the PowerPoint. Now, look at this, guys. This is basically reverse of what we have here. Cortical radiate artery becomes what? Cortical radiate vein. So go back to the picture. These little branches in blue coming off right here. Let me just change my color so I can show it to you. Red might not be the best color. Sorry. So these branches right here would be your cortical radiate vein. Parallel to these, you will have the arcuate vein. Arcuate vein goes down through the interlobar vein, and then interlobar vein actually eventually becomes what? Your renal vein. So notice when I went from renal artery, I followed up by what? Segmental artery. But here I go from what? Interlobal, right? To what? To renal vein, which means this segmental artery is present in terms of artery, but it's not present in terms of vein. And this is, and I put that in quote unquote, that's my trick question in an exam typically. What is the main blood vessel that is present in the arteries, but not in the vein? And that would be your segmental artery, which branches from the renal artery. So, couple of notes about this. First of all, you should be able to recreate this on your own. So you can say, and I haven't really gone into aorta and inferior vena cava. I'm hoping that you already, if you have looked at the circulatory system, you already have an idea that you always start with aorta, and then aorta sends oxygenated blood to the body, and vena cavas are the ones that pick up that blood. And because this is in the abdominal cavity, the only blood vessel that can do that is the inferior vena cava. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at your nephron. So nephrons are identified as the basic unit of the kidney. I mentioned that earlier. You can also call that the basic functional unit of the kidney because they are responsible for urine production. They have two parts, what we identify as renal corpuscle and what we identify as renal tubules. If you guys are unfamiliar with the word renal, anytime you hear that, it is discussing the word urinary system or your kidneys. So renal corpuscle and renal tubules. And then whenever nephron is done with urine production, that urine gets emptied into the collecting duct. So let's take a look at a typical nephron. So a typical nephron is made up of this circle right here, which is your renal corpuscle. So I'm going to label this right here. I'm just going to highlight it, follow it one thing at a time. And all of these that you can see kind of twisting, going up and down, twisting from here to here would be your renal tubules. So the two parts of the kidney, so the part of the nephron would be renal corpuscle and renal tubules. Now, renal corpuscle is made up of two structures. These two structures are glomerular capsule and glomerulus. Glomerular capsule and glomerulus. So let's go back and let me show you this. So here is my renal corpuscle. And this is a simplified version of what we're describing there. So this is my renal corpuscle. So this is renal corpuscle. Now, inside the renal corpuscle, you have two things. You have, and I'm going to color this for you guys differently so you guys can follow me. This is structure. And inside of that, you also have another structure. No, this is not a hand. It is depicting a capsule or depicting a glomerulus. Okay, so what do we have here? This is structure right at the center. This is a tuft of capillaries called glomerulus. So tuft of capillaries right here is the glomerulus. And this blood vessel that is bringing or coming into the glomerulus, that would be your, I'm going to shorthand that, that would be your afferent. And the one that is coming out would be your, what? Efferent. Again, this is kind of what we talked about earlier. Now, if this is glomerulus right at the center, the area that is surrounding the glomerulus would be your glomerular capsule. So, sorry, I'm moving forward so I can see something. So, renal corpuscle. Renal corpuscle is the first part of the neuron. It has the glomerulus, which is this structure right at the center. And it has the glomerular capsule around it, right? So, glomerular capsule itself is made up of, or glomerular or Bowman capsule is made up of two layers. Guys, remember the vocabulary. We are really familiar with this word. Parietal versus visceral. Visceral implied it was internal, and parietal implies that it was external, right? Outside versus inside. So let's take a look at the picture. Now, before I actually go that, parietal layer is made up of simple squamous epithelium, and visceral layer is consists of what we consider podocytes. So bear with me. Underneath this picture, what you see, underneath all of these yellow structures, what you have is your capillaries, right? Which we identified as glomerulus. Covering these glomerulus is these yellow structures, which are kind of like alien cells. And these are called what? Your podocytes. Podocytes are, follow me on this one, podocytes are the visceral layer of the glomerular capsule. Podocytes are the visceral layer of the glomerular capsule. What is my parietal layer of the glomerular capsule? Is this layer right here that's identified as the parietal layer. Look at the cell, guys. There are single flattened layers of cell, so they would be your simple squamous epithelium. So I'm going to repeat this one more time before we move on. When we're talking about renal corpuscle, which is this whole structure, it is broken down to two things: Bowman capsule, and Bowman or glomerular capsule, and glomerulus. Glomerulus is the tuft of capillaries you have at the center. And then the glomerular capsule has two layers. The outer layer, which is made up of simple squamous epithelium, is called the parietal layer. And the other layer, which is made up of these cells that are wrapping themselves around the glomerulus, these are called visceral layer, and they're made up of cells called podocytes. Podocytes plus the parietal layer together make your glomerular capsule. Another thing to note on this picture is that the afferent arteriole is the one that is coming in, and efferent arteriole is the one that is leaving. This is the same thing I described for you in this picture. Afferent is coming into the glomerulus, and efferent is leaving the glomerulus. Same thing as we have here. Afferent arteriole becomes the glomerulus, and when it exits, it becomes the efferent arteriole. Last thing we're going to talk about is the renal tubules. So renal tubules, which is the second part of your nephron, are made up of proximal convoluted tubules. Break down the word for yourself. Proximal as in near or close. Convoluted means twisted tubules. Nephron loop, which implies something similar to this. And it does have the descending and ascending limb. And distal convoluted tubules, which basically is opposite of the proximal. And that empties into what we call collecting ducts. So look at this, guys. Here is the beginning of my nephron. So this twisting part is at the beginning. So this is called what? The proximal convoluted tubules. Then the nephron loop is this whole thing, but you start to go down, then this becomes what? The descending limb. You twist and you come up, then that would become what? Your ascending limb. And then you have a bunch of, again, convoluted tubules, but now these are farther away. So these would be your distal convoluted tubules. All of these will empty into these two, which is called the collecting duct. So if you're following a path of urine production in a kidney, more specifically your nephron, you start with your glomerulus, which goes into the proximal convoluted tubules, which goes through the descending limb and the ascending limb of the loop of Nephron Loop. And that goes to the distal convoluted tubules. And by this time, urine is produced and it gets dumped into the collecting duct. Okay, I'm going to stop here and then we'll continue this PowerPoint the next time.